Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah McDonald, Vice President of the League of Women Voters of Lee County. I'm pinch hitting for Clara Ann Graham, our president. This morning's meeting is on social justice in education, and I hope you all find it very interesting and rewarding. I'd like to present Irene Kepler, who is chair of the Social Justice Committee, who will continue with the meeting.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. I would like to thank all of our members of our Social Policy Committee. This year, we focused on two issues in particular, housing, and I would like to thank the members of our Housing Subcommittee, in particular, Sue Osen and Lana Cow, for heading up our Housing Subcommittee. And our second focus was social justice in education, which brought us to our panel today. Our three panelists are Charlotte Nycklemoe, co-chair of the Juvenile Justice Action Team for the League of Women Voters of Florida, David Newlan, executive director of Safety, Security, and Emergency Management of the School District of Lee County, and Tommy Bowens, principal of the Success Academy of the School District of Lee County. Today, our three panelists are going to be speaking for each about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll be having a 15 to 20 minute Q&A at the end of the session. Throughout each of their pieces, you can be submitting your questions into the chat. Myself and Sandy Frank will be monitoring your questions and keeping track to answer at the end. If you don't hear your question being asked at the end, please submit it. We do have about 100 people registered. We have 37 participants right now. So if people continue to roll in and you don't see your question asked, please submit it again. So, and we are going to start with Charlotte, then David, and Tommy. Charlotte Nycklemoe is passionate about quality organizational leadership and making sure organizations adhere to its mission statement and strategic plans. The goal was evidenced in her work in a Chamber of Commerce in Minnesota and within the Collier County League of Women Voters. Charlotte attended the University of Minnesota and has had a 30-year career in commercial and industrial real estate, with the last 7 years as Director of Legislative Affairs for the Minnesota chapter of the National Association of Industrial and Office Properties. Her observations and experiences as a mother of daughters who were diagnosed with serious and persistent mental illness gave her the impetus to fight for the rights of mentally ill and at-risk children, to provide leadership to the National Association for Mental Illness Minnesota and to the League of Women Voters. Charlotte was born and raised in Minnesota and now resides in April. Thank you, Charlotte, for spending this time with us this morning. Charlotte, can you unmute yourself, please?
Always need that reminder for some reason. Thank you so much, Lee County, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, even though it's quite early. But I love to be talking about anything we can do to help at-risk kids in the state of Florida. And with that, I'm going to have Regina show my PowerPoint presentation. And I would like to talk to you this morning about some of the issues that are facing our at-risk kids in Florida. And I think, as most of you know, the list of what problems are facing our kids goes on and on and on and on. And so today I'm just going to talk to you about a couple of them. And I'd like to ask and let you know, what is our action team? I'm chairperson of our League of Women Voters Action Team for the state of Florida. We have 29 leagues in our state, and every month we have a meeting via Zoom where we have representatives of the leagues on this call. You can go to the next slide, please. And here's what our mission is. Our mission is to improve outcomes for at-risk youth in Florida by supporting and influencing best practice policies through education and advocacy. So with that, in our meetings, we have really good speakers every time. And hopefully by doing that, we each go out and advocate and educate within our own communities the problems that are facing our kids. For example, for our next meeting, one of our speakers, or our main speaker, is going to be the Circuit Court 20 juvenile judge, Judge Shannon McPhee. And I would invite any of you to participate in observing and listening to this speech. What we do, we advocate at the legislature. We're following at present about 5 bills right now. But as you can know, we always have a long ways to go. And we are also a participant in a major coalition, which is led by the Southern Poverty Law Coalition. And in that coalition, we have about 40 to 50 organizations that are all fighting for our at-risk kids. So what are we going to talk about today? Our agenda, I'm going to talk to you about the cost of the school policing report. And this report was a collaborative project of the ACLU of Florida, Equality Florida, Florida Social Justice in Schools Project, the Southern Poverty Law Coalition, and the League of Women Voters. And I want to remind you that I would be happy to share this entire report for anybody if you just email me and ask for it. And then I'll talk for a few minutes on the Baker Act. So what did we find out in this report? And of course, you all remember the terrible catastrophe we had at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting. And as a result of that, in 2018, the legislature passed a law which requires all public schools to host one of the 3 following, and then this was put into the Florida statutes. So they want the schools, the law says the schools should have a law enforcement officer or an armed staff member or an armed private security guard in all of their schools. And so what was the result of that? The result was increase the presence of the law enforcement in schools. And then we found out that there really is no evidence that officers in schools are trained to be counselors or teachers, or even to police the children or teens in our schools. Next slide. So what does the report say? We found out that there are 3,650 school resource officers in all the schools now, in the public schools in Florida. How many school nurses do we have in our Florida schools? We have 2,286. That's a ratio of 1 to 1,240 kids. How about social workers? We have a total of 1,414 social workers. That's a ratio of 1 social worker to 2,013 kids. And how many school psychologists do we have in the schools? We have a total of 1,452, with a ratio being 1 to 1,961. Now, 1 in 5 adolescents have a mental illness that will persist into adulthood. And the majority of children and adolescents who receive mental and developmental health services do so at school. So let me share with you what our the Florida School Board Association recommendations are. They recommend that the school counselor should be 1 to 250. And so you can see the difference there. Our social workers, they should have a caseload of no more than 1 for 250 caseloads. Today, students in Florida schools are more likely to interact with law enforcement at school than a nurse, a social worker, or a psychologist. Next slide. What else did we find out in this report? We found out that the number of youth arrests happening in the school hit a 5-year high of 20%. Police officers arrested elementary age kids 345 times, including 5 arrests of 6-year-olds and 1 arrest of a 5-year-old. That meant that we increased arrests of youths in school by 8%, while in the community, we had a decrease in the youth arrests of 12%. Let's talk a little bit about funding. Next slide, Regina, please. Thank you. So what funding do we have? We have an item in the Florida budget that says Safe Schools Funding. And this can be used for after-school programs, for behavior-driven intervention programs, for bullying interventions, and suicide prevention. And historically, this is what it was used for. But today, 98% of the state Safe Schools funding pays for police officers. So we've discovered that school administrations see police officers as just another resource to manage behavior in an otherwise under-resourced environment. And why wouldn't they when they don't have funds for school nurses or school psychologists? So now let's talk a little bit about the Baker Act. What is the Baker Act? The Baker Act is the state law that allows people to be sent and held for involuntary psychiatric exams. Parents up to this point have had no say. Each year in Florida, 36,000, that means 100 kids per day, are committed under the Baker Act. Many are taken away in the back of police cars, and parents get little say in what happens to their child, even though they're supposed to under state law. And actually, the Baker Law wasn't even designed with children in mind, yet they make up the fastest growing group of people sent for involuntary psychiatric evaluations. Their numbers have doubled since the state first started tracking commitments under the Baker Act in 1997. So together with the coalition, we have come up with a few core reforms which we are suggesting. We have a lot more, but these are the ones that have been prioritized. And so the parents or guardians of minors who are Baker Acted must be provided with access to a public defender if they want one, as soon as their child is involuntarily admitted. The second one, the practice of handcuffing or similarly restraining children that are Baker Acted should be limited to very extreme circumstances. Number 3, regulations or statutory changes should provide law enforcement, schools, mental health professionals, and others with greater clarity about the kinds of behaviors that show that children are genuinely a danger to themselves or others and require involuntary treatment. And there I might add that every school has what is called a code of conduct. And I would strongly encourage you to check out what your code of conduct in your schools is. I requested the code of conduct from the Collier schools the other day, and it's about 42 pages, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet. So number 4, the act should be amended to clarify that if a parent can safely assume responsibility for the care of a child and prevent them from harming themselves or others, they must be allowed to do so, and Baker acting is appropriate. And the last one is require that the Baker Act Reporting Center to compare the rates of admission between districts to show in which districts the Baker Act is being overused, and make these reports available to the public. And up to now, we've had really a terrible time with the collection of data and finding out just how many Baker Acts per school are being enacted. So lastly, what can you do? You can form a local league juvenile justice committee. You can join the state action team Zoom meetings to find out, become much more educated about what's going on with our kids. And you can research findings in your own county. Check out what the racial disparities say in the arrests or the Baker Acts in your school. The issuance of civil citations, and I'm sure most of you know what civil citations are, and that's where we can keep a child from being arrested, therefore it won't be on the record for the rest of her life. And as a matter of fact, another report that we are deeply involved in is called the Stepping Up Report by the Carruthers Institute, and it just was published, and that is giving us statistical data on how many civil citations are done in each county. And just for your information, Lee County for this past year had 230 arrests for first-time minor acts. So you're one of the top ones, as well as Collier County, unfortunately. We are one of the 3 highest circuit courts that have the highest number of arrests of our kids. Let's find out why. What is the basis of this? Number 3, how many kids in your schools have been Baker Acted? How many arrests have been made in your schools? And if you want to know that, you can go to what is called the dashboard on the Juvenile Justice, or the Department Juvenile Justice website. And there it'll give you all the statistics for the arrests and the racial disparities. And so these are just a few of things that we are dealing with. We are following 6 bills in legislature right now, and we are testifying for each of them. For example, the minimum age of arrest. There's a bill in the Senate right now saying 7 years, a minimum age, which to me is kind of a slap in the face. The House bill has one that says minimum age of 11 years. So we're hoping to get amendments onto that bill in the Senate. What else do we have? We have direct filing of information, and I think that that's going to make it finally to the full Senate floor. And that is allowing kids with more than misdemeanors charged with them to have their record expunged if they, of course, go through what the punishment requires of them and their charges. What we're following is do not prosecute children as adults. Let's raise that age from 14 to 15 years old. And let's see. I think that's it. Make sure you go onto your Florida Senate and your Florida House website in order to find out which bills are moving. And so that's it. I want to thank you again. If you have any questions, please email at that email address. And if you want any of the reports, I'd be happy to send to anybody upon request. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. Next, we have David Newlan, the Executive Director of Safety, Security, and Emergency Management for the School District of Lee County. David retired from the Cape Coral Police Department as police chief with 30 years of law enforcement experience in various aspects of public safety. His career included Patrol Bureau, Investigative Service Bureau, Vice, Major Crimes and Property Crimes, and the Professional Standards Bureau. He holds a bachelor's degree in public administration from Barry University and a master's degree with a major in human resources development and administration from Barry University. He is a graduate of the 252nd session of the FBI National Academy, the Administrative Officers Management Program from North Carolina State University, Florida Criminal Justice Executive Institute's Executive Leadership Seminar, and the 58th session of the Police Executive Research Forum Senior Management Institute for Police. Chief Newlan is the Certified Assessor Team Leader for the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies and was the chair for Region 10 Committee. He was on the board of the Lee County Human Services Council, past president for the Southwest Florida Police Chiefs Association, and a member of several organizations in the South Rotary. Mr. Newlan is a Florida native and has lived in Lee County, Florida since 1977. Welcome, David. Bowens is the principal of the Success Academy at the School District of Lee County. The Success Academy is an alternative school servicing students grade levels 6 through 12. Mr. Bowens is a graduate of Lee County School District, graduating from Cape Coral High School, the class of 1982. Mr. Bowens earned his master's in educational leadership from Nova Southeastern University and has worked as an administrator at the elementary, middle, high school, and special center level during his 25-year career in education. He is a member of the Lee County Administrators Association and enjoys watching football and basketball in his spare time. Thank you, Mr. Bowens.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming and sharing a part of this forum. I think it's very important that we have these discussions with students and kids and youth of the Southwest Florida. Being from here, I'm very interested in the success of kids, and for all my life, to do what's best for kids and try to take care of kids. Here at the Success Academy, our mission statement is to provide each student with the knowledge and skills and values required to be successful members of the school and community through academics and socialization and accountability. That's our mission statement. We just this year, we have increased our staff with, we have 2 psychologists here at the school, 2 resource officers, 1 social worker, and a fantastic mental health team to deal with the students, the whole child, the entire student. We also have a full-time nurse here every day and a sales care counselor to provide some extra care at home and services for the students who parents can't come into the school. Students are referred here to the Success Academy for a number of reasons, anywhere from drugs, alcohol, weapons, minor infractions such as tardies, number of tardies, skipping, and those minor infractions. What we did a couple of years ago, we implemented the Prevention Center. That is a buffer to students coming here at Success. That gives students who, let's say, for instance, have indulged in drugs, maybe for the first time and not too heavy in them, and it gives them to get opportunity to get counseling through the Hanley Center. They come out and counsel the kids and have a program which students have to complete before they transition back to the school. The deadline and the time frame on that is usually 20 days. Some students come in and are very successful within 15 days. It's something that is very intense. It's very knowledgeable, and they try to get the parents involved, and that's a good thing. I think the parents need to know what's going on. A lot of times they don't know, but the staff down there does a good job of transferring information, telling the parents, keeping them informed what's going on with their students, and that helps. We implemented also with the Success Academy this year, we implemented a tier level system. It gives the students the opportunity to return back to their schools in a faster manner also. It's a level 1, level 2, and level 3, and a level 4 system. It entails attendance, grades, and behavior. Student comes in for the first 20 days and is in attendance all 20 days, no referrals, good grades. We have them move themselves up to a tier system. We have a board with their name on it. They're allowed to go in, and we celebrate every time students move up. We acknowledge their hard work and also share that information with their sending school. So they look forward to them coming back and be happy about the students' progress they're making here. We've gotten a lot of kudos with the program. I think this one school, Mariner Middle, has kind of adopted the same kind of tier system in their schools prior to sending them here. So we're trying to do a lot of interventions here in Lee County. I think interventions help. Of course, there's those outliers who, have to have to really understand that things getting in trouble is not good. But for the most part, we try to do our best to make sure we service these students here in Lee County. And that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bowens. Can you address how referrals come to you?
Yes, the students are referred to us by their school, the geographical school, for infraction of the code of conduct. and it could be from any level 1, level 2, or level 3. That is screened by our district office through a SARC committee, to which the parent can come in and kind of question why they are being referred, and the committee can make a decision then what program they should be assigned to, prevention or success. A lot of times that's determined at the administrative hearing at the school base. And so they process the paperwork. We receive the students the very next day. We try to keep the students in school. Orientations are given every day. Give orientations via Zoom, of course, and the students are to arrive the next day. We have buses assigned immediately so we can get the students into school and not have a gap in their education.
Thank you. Okay, folks, I did reach out to Mr. Newlan. I have not been able to get a hold of him. I don't know what happened. He was on the connection since 9 o'clock this morning. I do apologize. We do have a few members of the school board member present today. I don't know if any of them want to be admitted as co-hosts to address. Mr. Newlan was going to speak about the role of school resource officers in the school system in terms of their role of training for mental health or de-escalation with the students. I don't know if anybody is prepared to go to the question and answer section or speak about that today. I know that school board member Gittens is in as a co-host, and Chris Patricia has said that she believes it's inappropriate for the school board members to speak because of sunshine laws. So I know that there had been questions regarding training of school resource officers. That is a legislative policy issue that you would set as a board. I don't believe that has anything to do with sunshine laws, but if the school board does not want to answer that, that's up to you. So that is a question that has been asked by, submitted ahead of time by our members in terms of what training is done for the school resource officers in terms of mental health. So if anybody would like to answer that question specifically.
There's in the chat, it says that Gwen Gittens is able to speak.
Okay.
So I think she's unmuted. Is that?
Oh, actually, I got Mr. Newlan is back in the.
Okay.
So I believe Mr. Newlan is ready to speak.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what, my computer froze up. My apologies. I'm not sure what happened. I guess that was just me. So my apologies for losing everybody. Irene, you want me to go ahead and start?
Yes, David, this is Regina Sheridan with the League of Women Voters of Florida. You can begin at any time, but I would also recommend that you turn your camera on. We just see your name across the screen right now.
Okay, my camera shows, let me see. My camera shows it's on. Is it, yeah. It shows on right now. Can you see me?
Yes, thank you. We're ready.
Okay. All right, my apologies. Anyway, welcome everybody. Good morning. Again, sorry for computer difficulties. Again, so, you know, as mentioned as part of my background, retiring from the Cape Coral Police Department, 30 years of law enforcement, and now as the Executive Director of Safety, Security, Emergency Management for Lake County School District. It's been a pleasure to work with the school district and with our school resource program and our students and staff. And some of the things I will say that, first of all, you know, when I look at the school resource officer program, working with the principals, assistant principals, staff, and students, you know, I think the stereotype of school resource officers has changed over time. from what it used to be. You know, we're not there to police our children. We're there to protect our children and work with our staff. And over time, you know, we've had, you know, it's important that as school resource officers, we go through a lot of different training, crisis intervention training. A lot of the departments have our officers go through mental training to understand, as well as threat assessment. There are state requirements that are required for school resource officers. You know, it's important that we build relationships with not only the faculty, but students. And, you know, we're there, in my opinion, we're there to work with the children, mentor the children, build a trust, so we can foster that climate of respect and promote communication. And I think one of the things that I am currently working on to improve on is the flow of communication to maintain that consistency, not only with, again, with our officers, but also with the faculty and the students. A lot of things, you know, I look at everything that's happened since the Marjorie Stoneman incident, which was obviously tragic. You know, there's been a lot of things put in place to help protect our schools. And the things that I'm hearing a lot as people speak, I think everybody's looking for a balance. There's got to be a balance. You know, we want the children to know, you know, I look at it when we were in school, we didn't have the anxieties that the kids have now. Even the faculty of worrying about maybe something happening at their school. Those things did not exist back in the day. That wasn't on the radar. But unfortunately nowadays it is. And it's terrible. We have to talk about these things, but the reality is we do. And I think what we're trying to find is right now is what is that balance? Where is that where we can give the kids the best education that they deserve. Those are our future. Those are our future leaders. We allow our educators to do their job. And as a team, we want to bring that together, but without creating a look where they feel they're, I hate to say the word prison, but they're in a place where it maybe inhibits them from enjoying. These times in school should be something you look back as memories, good memories. And I think that's where I hear and see things that, where is that balance at? What can we do to maintain that balance, still provide safety? So I think communication, in my opinion, is key. One of the things I'm pushing for right now is more communication. There's a student advisory committee that I'm going to be meeting with soon. And when I was with the City of Cape Coral, one of the things I used to speak to the youth council, and I learn more from the students than anybody else. They see things, they experience things that we don't encounter or think of. And when we look at putting policies and procedures forward, you need that buy-in, you need that support. But you need to understand too, there may be things that we're doing that we don't realize because we haven't asked the right questions. You know, what are we not doing? What can we do better? And I think that goes with all parties involved in the school district, not just students, but also the teachers and faculty. So one of the things that I want to see more of is better communication to maintain that consistency. And, you know, when you work with kids in schools, you have to understand there's various cultures throughout the school system. And you have to understand that culture, that not one culture is better than the other. And officers that work in the schools have to have patience. That's part of what they're trained to do, is to be there not only as mentors, but have the patience. When you talk about understanding other cultures or their backgrounds, you may not have that cooperation at the beginning. It can be based on the family backgrounds. Maybe they've had a bad experience in the past with law enforcement outside the school, possibly. So these things have to be considered. When we talk about de-escalation techniques, you know, how is de-escalation? Is that our school resource officers trained in de-escalation? And if so, what does that mean? The answer is yes, they are trained in de-escalation. That has become more prominent in law enforcement, especially in the schools. And what that means is the officers have to have more patience, do understand when they're dealing with kids based on maybe that mental level, the age they're talking to. That obviously has a big play in it. You have to have that understanding of your audience or who you're dealing with That's where de-escalation is very important to have that understanding when it comes to that. Some of the things too that I heard the comment made before, I think by Charlotte, about there was some comments about civil citations. And it's funny because we've had that discussion for years about civil citations. I can tell you from a law enforcement perspective, at least in our area, that we do a lot of civil citations. Now, the issue with civil citations, I will tell you, is you have to understand what are the guidelines for civil citations to be in compliance. So that's one thing you have to look at considering is when you have a civil citation that's issued against a child, because nobody wants that to go in the child's record. We don't want to hurt their future. So if we can issue a civil citation, a lot of times law enforcement is going to do that, but there are statutory guidelines you have to follow when issuing a civil citation. Part of it is you have to have the agreement of the parents. You have to have the juvenile has to accept responsibility. Sometimes it only can be a first-time offense. And again, I can tell you we've had that conversation. So I'd be interested to know on the numbers as well, is how many civil citations are issued versus arrests, and what are those, and how many of those are repeat offenders, because that may be also an issue. The other thing too you have to look at, I think, is when you have more of the, now that we're applying officers into a school setting, I think you're going to see the stats are going to go up as well too, versus before where schools didn't have school resource officers. The idea obviously is to be proactive, not reactive. And I think as if you have to remember as well too, is you want to prevent things from happening in the school, but also that also can prevent things from happening outside the school, because when officers work with students in the schools and they can establish relationships, they learn a lot about what's happening, not only in the school, but in the community. And it's very important. So we look at those different things. And again, I say those things because I think these things are still evolving. We have to remember we are following certain guidelines that must be followed, but I think there's still that balance. And I've answered some of the questions. I know I mentioned training that we go through. There's a question about Lee County School District training for SROs. Well, there's threat assessment training. There's crisis intervention training, like I mentioned, that they go through at their own individual departments. There is a requirement when you're a school resource officer by state law, you go through a course that's given through the academy as well. Mental health training. I think I talked about de-escalation. Yes, the school resource officers are trained on de-escalation techniques. A lot of times you'll find agencies, especially ours in Southwest Florida, that all of our agencies are accredited. And I think it's one of the things too, I want to make sure that remind people of that when you talk about accreditation, what does that mean? What does that look like? National accreditation, which all the agencies in Southwest Florida are accredited, that means they are following the best practices nationwide, vetted by experts, a panel of experts that go through policies and procedures on an annual basis, and these departments must comply with, and they are audited every year to make sure they are following best practices. So a lot of these things that we talk about sometimes, these are from being accredited, which helps us out when you put officers in schools, they already have this training. One of the questions I had was the vision of the school district's relationship between students and officers. Our vision is, again, this is a partnership. We are there to mentor our kids. We're there to protect our kids and our faculty. And so I say that because I don't want to think we're out there to police our kids, but we're there to work as a team to, in my opinion, when we provide protection for our kids, it allows them to get the best education they can get provided by our educators. And that's what's important. And so we're there again to help the students move forward as our future leaders. I had a question about contracts with school resource officers. How often are those renewed? Those are renewed on an annual basis with our local agencies that participate. There are 4 agencies that participate in the school resource program in Lee County. Yeah, Lee County Sheriff's Office, Fort Myers Police Department, Cape Coral Police Department, and Sanibel. I was asked the question, do I get involved in negotiations with the contract? Yes, I do. I've already been working with the agencies already for next year, trying to get ahead of it. So we are prepared. Another question was, when a student is called by a school administrator to deal with a student problem, how is it determined that it is criminal and not a mental health problem? Well, again, now you're looking at, depending on the situation, when it becomes a student problem, we have to look at, again, what we're talking about here. If it's a crime related, where a student does something that's in violation of a state statute, again, this is where we talk about can we issue a civil citation if that applies. My point is we're not trying to arrest the student, but if there's a violation in a crime that occurs or a felony, we do have to follow certain procedures. Certain things have to be reported, but doesn't always mean that the person would be charged, but may be documented. And sometimes I think when they look at and work with the administrator or the parent, knowing that this student does have prior mental health problems, those are one of the conversations that we would have to find out where do we go from here, how can we help the student. After a student is referred to an SRO officer due to a safety behavior incident, what kind of follow-up is done with the student, parent officer, and school administration? Again, this would be dependent upon the circumstances of what we're talking about. It's a safety behavior. It could be a conversation with the student, with the parents. Sometimes we'll document in a threat assessment report based on, what are we talking about? How serious is it? By contacting the parents, it does, let's say the student, for example, maybe makes a comment about having access to weapons or something like that. Is there weapons in the house? You have that, you meet with the parents. And so that's that's part of what we would end up doing in a safety behavior issue. It could lead to that. Just a conversation, again, like I said, with the parents together with the school administration, and find out, it could have been just an isolated incident. And again, these things are documented, but I think the biggest thing is obviously we want to prevent it from happening again. So we'll work with the parents counseling as well and find the best step for that student. Is there a plan implemented for the student and parent after an encounter with an officer? Again, I would say a plan. Yes, obviously, anytime an officer has an encounter with a student, depending on the circumstances, there's going to be a conversation with the parents. We need, a lot of times we'll reach out to the parents at some point, depending on the circumstances, to find out, are the parents aware of maybe what their child has done or what's going on at home? And then, like I said before, we want to figure out where we go from here. So, they do work with the faculty and the parents. And the thing I would say too is, again, we got to remember that this is a team effort. We're not educators, and I would never pretend to be one. So what I say is because the school resource officers, they're there for safety, they're to protect, and we can't do that alone. And that this is a team effort, and that's where we have to find that balance between everybody. And I think that the most important thing, again, I'll reiterate again what I've said before, is communication is the most important thing. Consistency, having open dialogue, listening to different various groups to find out their concerns, what are they seeing, what are we not doing, and what can we do better. Anyway, I know there's probably maybe some questions. So is there some questions for me as well that people have sent in?
There are. We have a bunch of questions. So I'm going to go back up to the beginning of the chat.
Okay.
In the order that we've received them. Let's see. I had some actually that were submitted yesterday, so I'm going to start with those. Some of these I don't know if you'll know, Mr. Newlan. Some of them are legislative. In terms of safe school funding, does this come under your budget as well? Under your position?
The safe school funding, I think you're referring to part of it goes to the school resource officer program. Then yes, that would fall partially under ours. Yes.
Okay. Do you know what you use that funding for other than school resource officers?
That's primarily what it is used for. Anything that else would be anything that's safety, security related as it falls on the schools.
What is your relationship, your officers, your school resource officers' relationship with the school counselors, social workers, psychologists? Do you often consult with them? Your officers consult with them, or?
I know from my own personal experience, the answer is yes. They do work with the counselors and those that work in the school. I think I said this is important, that this is a team effort. And I think, like I said, when you look at originally, if you go back years ago and look at school resource officers, that has changed to what it is today, which is that working more together and not, I think, the stereotype we've looked at years ago.
What do you think is the biggest perceived threat to Lee County schools?
When you say that, you mean as far as danger threat? You mean as far as like outside, or?
For either from the student's perspective or the school district's perspective of perceived threats?
Well, I think one of the things, I can't say there's one single thing. I think we look at most of the topic, I feel when we talk about serious threats, the first thing that comes up in his mind is active shooter. And that's just what I think everything's based on. I think that's one piece of the puzzle. And again, it's something we have to take very seriously. There's so much more that has to be considered beyond just active shooter. So much more that we have to be aware of and be cognizant of our surroundings. Because most of the things that have happened are internally. And if you go back in history of active shooters, most of it was they were aware of, or it was been planned. It wasn't something they just thought of, I'll do this today. So I think it's really, it's having more of an overall view of everything, not just active shooter. I think we have to kind of go beyond that, take off our tunnel vision and kind of expand a little bit and look at everything around us. And I think that's what I'm kind of seeing as I go into this.
Okay, another question. Let me see in the chat. Dr. Pavelka is speaking about has restorative justice, has that been introduced at all into Lee County schools? Are you familiar with that concept? Mr. Bowens, are you familiar with that concept at the Success Academy at all?
Yes, that's a vital part of our process and our procedures here. We practice restorative justice. It's an intricate part of our program here with the students. We do a lot of interventions that are restorative practice here in the school. We train our teachers on practices. Also, students go through a walk through some situations where restorative practice on their behalf, they can implement and kind of handle things with their own restorative practices here at our school. Yes.
Okay. And Judy Alves had asked too about what are the qualifications of the staff that are making, I know you had mentioned teachers do referrals, but school counselors, social workers as well. Would it come from outside community like probation officers or social workers? For example, if Child Protective Services or other social workers in the community are working with the family?
We are a vital partner with them. The social workers and case managers come into the school. We allow them to make visitations with students here at school and get very involved in our team here at school. We share information and dialogue about the students that they're getting counseling outside and also inside the school.
Okay, and Mr. Newlan, there was a question about the specific information on the training that resource officers receive. Is that available to the public somewhere?
There is, by statute, there is a state requirement. So yes, to answer the question, that part of that would be accessible by the public. You also have to look at your individual agencies that are involved. And I said, I mentioned before about accreditation. Now that's an important piece because there are requirements due to accreditation that officers must go through, which does assist in your training when they become an SRO. So yes.
And I guess this would be for both Mr. Newlan and Mr. Bowen. Do you think that you both have the resources that you need to meet the safety and mental health and emotional needs of your students right now?
I can start, again, as I'm coming in, I think we have, this is an ongoing basis. This is a partnership with all the local agencies. So as long as we maintain that partnership and we can fulfill the requirements that needs to be there is in place for the schools, then yes. But I think that's something that we look at every year. And as new schools are established and built, we have to add those resources to the newer schools as well. So as long as we can maintain that partnership, then yes, we are in good shape. And funding from the state as well.
I agree with David. I think it's always an evolving process. Every year is a different year. See different needs from kids, students who move into the area. So it's an evolving process in which I think we're meeting or catching up or meeting standards to help serve the kids, serve the students.
Okay, I'm just going through the chat, making sure I haven't missed any questions. If anyone else has questions or if I missed, can you please submit them at the end? We would like some examples of restorative justice. Mr. Bowens, can you give some examples of what your students have participated in at the Success Academy?
Yes, we have we developed a student body committee that practices and illustrates to the students those practices. One of the things is mentoring. We also have our staff mentor and counsel the kids in regard to what restorative practices are appropriate at whatever infraction they have. They specifically use a lot of communication in restorative practice and talking and walking through their feelings and expressing themselves, because that's what a lot of kids can't express their frustrations and can't communicate what is bothering them. So most of it is getting the students to open up and communicate their feelings and emotions.
Thank you. Okay, and we have Dr. Pavelka is going to make a comment. I'm just getting her situated. 1 second here. Another question we have is, how does the increase in school arrest relate to the decrease in community arrest? And Charlotte had made the comment earlier, and the number that she had made in citations were first-time offenses.
Is that for me? I take it? Is that for me?
I'm sorry. Yes. Yes.
Okay, sorry. Well, what I mean by saying that is that, okay, so when you look at location of arrests, this is a database issue that you have to consider. So if an officer comes to a school to make an arrest, the violation may not have occurred at the school property. It may have occurred off school property where, let's say, a student committed several burglaries, but the officer had located the student in the school. So the stats might show that the arrest was made at the school, but the violation didn't occur at the school. The other part I would tell you is when you look at that data as well, a lot of times when we say a decrease, I'll give you an example. Years ago, the city of Cape Coral was not involved in the school resource officer program. In 2010, at the time, not based on my decision, but we had stepped out of the program, and Lee County Sheriff's Office was resource officers in our schools in the city of Cape Coral. We lost touch with our children. We did not know what was going on in our schools because we weren't in the schools. But part of that goes on too. So when you don't know your youth in your area, and you don't know them in the schools, you lose touch with them outside the schools as well, because you deal with that same student not only in school, but outside the school. And we lost touch with that. So getting back into the schools a couple of years ago, we're able to get, again, become mentors to our children to find out what's going on and learn more. And when you say sometimes there's a decrease outside, because when you know what's going on, when you build a trust with your children, with the student, and they confide in the officers, and I've seen this firsthand, and they give their officers information, and they trust the officer, and the officer can turn that student around. Sometimes maybe the student had a bad, a bad experience with an officer, for example, or maybe comes from a harder home life, and we can help that student turn around. That can help. That's the proactive side. That's the proactive side to help decrease what's happening outside of the schools as well. So I hope that makes sense. It's in a good way. We're preventing things from happening because we are able to become closer to the students that confide in us, that learn to do things differently, or we can help to establish that partnership. And part of that was too, is that's why we also created the PAL program, because we can help students that normally can't afford to get involved in sports to help them to do something with their time outside of school and get involved in certain athletics. And that has helped a lot as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Mr. Bowens, we had a question about the 20-day buffer program.
Yeah, the 20-day prevention program. That's for students who have like minor drug offenses, first time students who are using drugs or possess drugs on campus. They're over there, like say, getting the counseling from the handling center. They're doing structural strategies on how to deal and cope with, and also they're getting the counseling through the mental health piece too for students who are indulging and participating in drugs.
Do you have a full-time social worker at the Success Academy or school counselor?
I have a part-time social worker. She comes in 3 days out of the 5 days of the week. She's really good too. She's done a good job in the pandemic of tracking students down. Yes, she's here 3 days out of the 5 days she's here. 5 days a week she's here.
And I think we have a couple more questions. I believe that we've got everybody who has asked a question in the chat. Is there anyone else that I missed? Mr. Bowens, what are the type of certifications held by your teachers at the Academy?
We have the standard certifications, the math, science, all the similar typical certifications that teachers possess. We have certified teachers in every area here for the middle school and high school level.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Bowens, can you discuss the achievement levels of students when they come in and where they leave?
Yes, we're just in the process of tracking that data now because we implemented the new process of students getting through the new tier system this year. We're tracking the data as we go. I do not have those numbers right now with me. I can provide those for you. If you email me, I can provide those numbers for you. Was that question asking prior to COVID?
Yes.
That's part of the reasons we wanted, as an administrator, I came here for the first year here, we had students here for 180 days. The students were not being successful. They reached around 140, we start tracking around the 140-day mark. We would have students who were doing great academically, behavior-wise, and around the 140-day, we found that students just would fell off. I mean, they would just not come to school. The behavior got bad. It seemed to be angry. Getting frustrated with the number of days they were here, and it's just like the time just wouldn't end, even though they're doing everything right. And so that's what prompted us to implement a new tier system. So it gives that student who comes in and works hard and tries to correct his behavior and really get his academics up and be successful for some kind of instant gratification and reward and returning back to their school.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Okay, I believe that I got to everyone in the chat. Do counselors at Success work with counselors at their returning school? So is there a transition team?
Yes, there is. And that consists of me as the administrator and my assistant principals and also my behavior specialist. And I have a dean of students. We do most of the integration process. I've just visited a couple of schools a couple of weeks ago. We had students when they transitioned. We went over to follow up with them to see how they were doing, met with the principals, the administrative teams, the counselors to see how the students were doing. We shared strategies that the student had over here, we're using over here. And just to give them a heads up, a little more leeway room over there to be successful. So we do stay in contact, and there's a transition team. And I like going to see the students, so stay in touch with them. So I'm an integral part of it.
Okay. And do you have any parental programs, any parenting groups or classes or support for?
The support we have now is through Silence Care, our Silence Care worker who's involved with the students. I mean, it's home visits, and also during the summer, the parents come out to the school to meet here at the school because it's more of a safer environment for the parents and more or less to be intimidated by coming in the summer. And so that continues all through the year.
Thank you. Okay. There were some questions about contact for our panelists. So when we send out this recording, if we can add your professional email addresses for any follow-up questions, if that'll be okay with the three of you.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, there's a question about Michael looked at an incident of fighting and only 25% are referred to law enforcement. What happens to the rest? So if, there are 10 fights in a school and only 25% of those are actually referred to law enforcement for charges, then how is that handled, the rest of those?
Go ahead, sorry.
You want me to go first, David?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Okay. They're handled through the administrative hearings. The principal and the administration hold an administrative hearing where we have a meeting where the students, parents, and the students there to share the size of the story and what happened and get all the details out. And then there's a recommendation by the principal and the administrative team to whether they are just getting suspension, alternative suspension. I know that we are definitely using a lot of alternative suspension these days with the peer conflicts that they're happening. You have students just horse playing, and it led up to something, it escalated real quick and we got diffused. That's something that we try to use alternative to suspension with regard to that. Detention after school, Saturday schools, those type of things. But the administration deals with most of it.
Mr. Bowens answered the question. I said the same thing.
And then the last question is, what can the League of Women Voters or the community do to support either of you?
Yes, if I can go first. I saw Ms. Jordan now and typed in the box that we had guest speakers come out and speak to the students from the community. We were doing a lot of that. I think it was once a month prior to the COVID. We had great speakers and people wanted to come out and serve as mentors to the students. Mr. David Martin came out, attorney here in Lee County, spoke to the student. And I think he got the student pretty excited about becoming a lawyer. Haven't followed up with the students, see what he's doing now, but that was very impactful to that one student. If you touch one student here, it's a phenomenal job, and it does help the kids. So we did have a lot of community people come in and speak prior to COVID.
Okay.
I think two things. One of the things, like I mentioned before, is communication is important. I think one of the things I'd like to try to work on is putting together an outside advisory committee, or that maybe this group can also, your group can also participate as part of that. Again, I think it's important when we look at things that are going on in the schools and outside the schools, that we answer these questions, maybe things that there could be misinformation, things we're not considering. But I think as we work together on these things, I think it'll just help. It puts a better plan in place from what's happening in the schools and how it's looked upon outside the school. And I think, and again, we talk about even data itself. Data can be, depending on where it's coming from, can really give misinformation sometimes and how it originates. So I would like to see that possibly in the future. And anytime, I'd be willing to speak anytime in the future as well to help answer any questions. Just let me know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we very much appreciate our speakers this morning. And for those of you who joined our call, we appreciate it. The Social Policy Committee did forward a copy of the cost of school policing to the school board and did ask them, and there was a commitment from the school board to look at it. And Patricia in particular said that she would forward it to that particular committee and get back with us. We asked them to look at the recommendations and respond to it. And I did have that commitment from her. So we will have, the Social Policy Committee will be meeting in April, and we're always looking for new members. So when this is sent out, this recording is sent out, we will also let you know when our April meeting is. And so you are more than welcome to join us. Again, thank you and have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We would very much like to thank everybody for participating, our speakers as well as our members and non-members. I would like to say, any of you who are not members of the league, please join us. We would love to have you. You can get the information on our website at lwvlee.org. Thank you.